type thing. It got to a point where she was trying to convince people that she had grabbed the wrong bottle because the arsenic obviously was right next to this particular foaming agent.
Bitch, everybody knows you didn't make that fucking mistake because you know that bottle a little too well.
Right, no kidding.
Like 11 times too well.
The thing that actually had gotten her caught, just so you know, was when she was in Rhode Island, she was living with the other widower. She had given 2 different names to the hotel proprietor's wife, and the wife thought it was a bit strange. So she called the police and was like, I don't know if it's a thing, but I have a concern. And that's why they were able to take her back to jail. She said that, I wish to say that I would never give Mr. Hulbert anything to my knowledge that would cause any pain. What? Don't sneeze.
Oh, just that one?
Ty, you would be dead.
Are you
You
kidding?
would be so dead.
Oh, yeah, because I clear my throat every 5 seconds. What's wrong with her? If you've got a problem with people that are sick, why don't you just go marry a weird, old-timey personal trainer?
And then to work as a nurse.
Right? Well, I mean, I could see that in a weird way.
Because she's a straight-up angel of death before it was even as well known, obviously.
Oh, yeah. I like that Lydia Sherman is weirdly a lighthearted martyr.
She's a lot of things. Are you sick, Ty?
Oh my god, you're out of control.
I'm worried about you.
No. Moving into the paranormal portion of the show, I am very excited to talk about this, and it's another one of those things where it's a little bit bigger, it's a little bit more well-known, so you might know it, but I'm hoping that between the history and the experiences, I can maybe bring something to it that you haven't heard yet. That's my jam.
I'm with it. I'm really excited.
I'm still holding out hope, though, that you don't know what it is.
Okay.
I'm going to tell you all about Poveglia Island.
Okay. No, I totally... Okay. All right, I'm ready. I'm sorry. I'm excited. I'm too excited. I get excited.
Oh.
But okay,
you know what?
okay, wait.
At least you're excited.
I know, but I am also an insane person, and I almost covered it.
It is really fascinating. Poveglia Island, by the way, is located in Italy. So the Venice Lagoon is located off the eastern coast of northern Italy. There are 166 small islands, or islets, depending on what you want to call them.
Right.
While Poveglia is just one of those islands, it also happens to be the most famous because of its very macabre past.
That's totally gross. Okay, I'm into it. I'm so excited.
Although it's believed the island could have been inhabited as early as 2000 BCE, before the Common Era.
Right.
The island was first mentioned in print in the early 5th century. It was mentioned as a safe haven from attacks by Alaric the Visigoth and Attila the Hun during the decline of the Roman Empire. Because there were so many small islands in that lagoon that were easily defensible, military forces pretty much just left these small islands alone. It was dangerous and it wasn't worth it to try to go in there and conquer. In 864 CE, Common Era, after the governor was killed, roughly 200 slaves fled from Venice and they made their home on the island of Poveglia, where it's believed that once they made it there, they were able to live out their lives in a quiet and peaceful manner. In 1379, because of the War of Chioggia, officials forced anyone living on Poveglia to move to another island in the lagoon so that the officials could use Poveglia as a military outpost. In an effort to enforce strict control over the lagoon, an octagonal fort was constructed, and Poveglia was then armed with naval artillery. The fort was built on Poveglia, but the fort had a canal running between it and then the rest of the island. After the war was over, The government tried to find a purpose for the island, and despite their efforts, Poveglia remained unpopulated for about 2 centuries.
Because after you kick people off the island, they don't really want to return when you've ruined everything that they had.
Exactly. So in order to understand what happened to Poveglia after the war, we actually need to go back a few decades. We're going to talk about the bubonic plague now.
Mm-hmm.
So the bubonic plague struck Italy in 1347, and it had specifically spread to Venice in the year 1348. It would eventually kill half of Venice's population.
Right.
Now, during this time, the Venetians learned how the disease spread and that it was being introduced into the area by people and ships coming in and out of Venice. It wasn't long before officials realized that the sick and the dead needed to be separated from healthy individuals. In an effort to minimize the contact that was happening between healthy individuals and all of these disease-ridden corpses, 2 very large burial pits were established in separate locations outside of the main city of Venice. Unfortunately, what happened was the bodies were quite literally piling up so quickly that both of the pits had, very soon after they were put into use, become overwhelmed and were no longer really very useful. And because of this overflow, the city then started transporting its masses of dead bodies to 2 different islands in the lagoon. Neither of which, by the way, at this point are Poveglia. There's no good or proper burial for these people, nothing is marked, and they're literally just being scattered.
Right. And the families can't easily get to them.
Now we're going to fast forward to the early 1400s. So the Venetians have invented this concept of the lazaretto, which is an institution or a hospital designed for the quarantine of ill and potentially ill people. Lazaretto Vecchio is another small island that exists in that Venetian lagoon.
Mm-hmm.
So it becomes home to the first ever lazaretto. So here's something really interesting about that island particularly. Archaeologists have uncovered skeletal remains on that island of more than 1,500 buried in pits scattered throughout the island. And they actually believe to this day that there are thousands more to be found. They've just yet to be discovered. In the 1570s, and then again in the 1630s, there are 2 more bubonic plague epidemics that ravage the Venetian population.
The canal system they have through there, obviously a lot of their trade is specifically coming from ships where
yes.
one person gets sick and then everyone gets sick, and then that ship rolls into the harbor and brings that sickness to a city.
Well, that's right. When you have ships coming in and out, and they're coming from all over, you are opened up to just about any type of disease that comes in, especially when there's no regulation on it. The Venetians realize that the disease can spread from living person to living person, but they also know that it can be spread just from dead bodies. So they're trying to make efforts to control that, but nothing is being done really vehemently to control the spread of diseases coming into Venice from these ships that are moving in and out.
Mm-hmm.
Which I think is interesting because you're only taking half of the problem and trying to solve it. You're leaving the other half of the problem completely open.
Right.
So now, various islands are being used as a quarantine zone for people with the plague. Now including Poveglia, by the way, so now that becomes part of the equation. These islands are also being used as dumping grounds for the masses of corpses that are mounting. Sometimes the amount of corpses needing to be taken to these islands was so great that they needed to employ barges to transport all of the bodies. Over time, Poveglia became the main quarantine zone for all of the infected people and for all of the bodies being transported. And there was a large facility that had been built there as a lazaretto. So it was kind of like a one-stop shop for all of your body burying and sick people quarantining. Okay,
Is that what their advertisement was?
If you showed mild symptoms or were just suspected by somebody of being infected, you were very quickly and very forcibly taken away from your home, your family, and all of society to be quarantined on Poveglia Island for up to 40 days. After which you would either die or, rarely in some cases, recover.
Mm-hmm.
Authorities were at the point where they were constantly incinerating thousands of bodies on Poveglia to stop the spread of the disease. In 1777, the Magistrate of Health took control over the island and turned it into a checkpoint. It was made necessary that any boat or ship heading into Venice would be subject to a rigorous inspection as a preventative measure against diseases. So now we're going to move into the 1790s. We have a situation where two ships had apparently failed this preventative measure, this test, because officials found cases of the plague on board of both of these ships. As a result, Poveglia Island became once again a quarantine colony for roughly 10 years until the early 1800s when the hospital was shut down. In the early 20th century, the government had decided that it was going to repurpose the buildings on Poveglia Island and convert them into an institution for, ding ding ding, the mentally ill. Now featuring the mentally ill. It didn't take long before stories of maltreatment and crude experiments being performed on patients made their way to the outside world.
Not at this time. What? People were mistreated?
Oh, you know what? I may have gotten a little misty-eyed. So, that being said, there was apparently one especially sadistic doctor who worked at the institution, and he truly believed that lobotomies could fix just about anything that was believed to be wrong with patients.
Like a lot of people in that era, though.
Yeah, he believed it in a really special way. He would take them into surgery against their will all the time. When you look at the rise of the transorbital lobotomy in America, a lot of people actually opted to have it because they were convinced that it was something that was going to fix them or one of their relatives or loved ones and help them.
It was one of the Kennedys, right?
Yeah, it was. No, you're right. It was. What do we do with mentally ill people at that time? So to perform these lobotomies, this particular doctor reportedly used a combination of hammers.
Oh, good.
Nails.
Perfect.
Drills.
Cool. So I'm building a house.
Chisels. He also chose to use all of these items for these procedures without ever once giving a sound theoretical basis as to why he needed to use these particular items.
I don't even know what to say after chisels happened.
He was grabbing a hammer and a chisel, putting it somewhere in your brain, and he wanted to see what moved. It's also important to note, on top of the fact that he was using all of these crude instruments, that he never once paid any attention to general safety or, and this is the worst part, sanitation.
Cool.
It was apparently common for patients to be kept awake at night by the screams of pain and despair emanating from the bell tower on the facility.
Oh, good.
The bell tower is where the doctor would perform his experiments and surgeries because he was helping people. So to make matters even worse, patients began claiming this hospital was haunted as soon as the hospital opened. Couple that with some unseen physical contact and full body apparitions.
Oh, good.
Mixed with the constant screams of agony, and you're probably not getting a great night's sleep. Things didn't end so well for this doctor.
Okay, not surprising.
He was found dead after falling from the top of the bell tower where he did his surgery